The courtroom was silent. Everyone expected the 6-year-old boy to cry, or maybe to hide behind his mother. Instead, Jack lifted his small face and spoke in a voice so soft that the judge had to lean forward to hear him. "Daddy isn't gone," Jack said. "He's under the floor." The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. They rippled across the room. The prosecutor blinked. The defense attorney laughed nervously. A few people in the gallery whispered. A child saying something strange wasn't new. Children misremember things. They invent stories to cope with fear. Most of the adults in that room thought Jack was confused. Some even believed his imagination had been twisted by grief. But Jack didn't smile. He didn't look like he was telling a story. His small hands clutched the wooden railing as if holding on to the truth itself. His eyes didn't waver. The judge shifted uncomfortably. "Jack," she said gently, "what do you mean by that?" Jack hesitated, then repeated himself. "Daddy's under the floor." In the living room. Gasps filled the room. A police officer standing in the back shook his head slowly. Another scribbled something on a notepad. The lawyers quickly changed the subject, trying to move on. They thought Jack was just a grieving boy who couldn't accept reality. But Jack's words wouldn't leave their minds. At home, things had never been safe for Jack. His father was a complicated man, loved by some, feared by others. Neighbors whispered about fights inside the house. Teachers noticed bruises on Jack's arms, but explanations were always given, and paperwork was buried under more urgent cases. Jack's mother tried to keep things normal. She sent him to school, packed lunches, smiled for neighbors. But behind closed doors, silence stretched heavy over the house. Then, one day, his father was gone. Just like that. Family members said he had left. Others claimed he had traveled for work. But no phone calls came. No letters. No trace. Jack was the only one who kept saying the same thing. "Daddy is in the house. Daddy didn't leave." At first, his words were dismissed as grief. People thought he was too young to understand loss. But Jack insisted. Again and again. Months passed before the case reached the courtroom. By then, his father had been officially listed as missing. His mother sat stiff and pale during hearings. Jack was brought in only because Child Services wanted his testimony about family life. No one expected him to speak of death. When he whispered those words, everyone tried to move past them. Yet they stuck like burrs. They stayed in the minds of the officers who had heard too many stories like this before. One detective in the back of the room, a man named Harris, couldn't shake it. He had seen children tell truths adults were too afraid to believe. He knew sometimes the smallest voices carried the heaviest secrets. That night, Harris opened the old case files again. He read the reports about fights, the calls from neighbors, the school complaints. He underlined one note. "Child repeatedly claims father is inside the home." Harris closed the folder, grabbed his keys, and decided to drive past the house again. Something about Jack's calm words wouldn't let him sleep. The boy had sounded too certain. Too exact. And Harris had learned long ago that children don't invent details like "under the floor" unless they've seen something no child should ever see. Detective Harris parked across the street from the small house late that night. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn tight. A thin fog had rolled in, softening the glow of the streetlights. The place looked ordinary. A single-story home with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and a yard where toys lay forgotten. Ordinary, except for the silence. Harris sat in his car, engine off, staring at the house. Jack's voice replayed in his mind. "Daddy isn't gone. He's under the floor." The words didn't sound like fantasy. They sounded like memory. The next morning, Harris convinced his captain to reopen the case. Not officially. Not yet. But enough to bring 2 officers with shovels and flashlights to the property. Jack's mother tried to stop them at the door. "You don't have a warrant," she said, voice sharp, arms folded tight. Harris didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we're here to clear up confusion. If there's nothing here, you'll never hear from us again, she argued. She pleaded. But when Harris mentioned Child Protective Services, she stepped aside. Her face drained of color as the officers entered. The living room smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was old, worn thin by years of footsteps. Harris paced slowly across it, listening. He tapped his foot against the floorboards. Hollow thuds answered back. Here, he muttered. The officers cut the carpet back with a knife. Dust rose as the edges curled. Beneath it lay a patch of uneven boards. Nails bent at odd angles. One officer pried them up with a crowbar. The sound echoed through the house like a scream. The air beneath was heavy, damp. A smell leaked out, foul, sour, unmistakable. The officers froze. Harris whispered, "Keep digging." The neighbors gathered outside as word spread. They stood on porches and sidewalks, clutching coats against the cold. Whispers ran through the crowd. Children clung to their parents' hands. Inside, the digging went on. Shovels scraped. Boards cracked. The smell grew stronger, seeping into every corner of the house. Finally, a shovel hit something solid. The officer leaned down, flashlight beam trembling. A moment later, he staggered back, hand clamped over his mouth. Beneath the boards, wrapped in plastic and buried in dirt, was the outline of a human body. The living room fell silent. The only sound was Jack's mother, sobbing into her hands. By evening, the house was sealed off with yellow tape. The body was removed carefully, placed into a black bag, lifted into the back of a van. Reporters crowded the street, shouting questions no one wanted to answer. The official statement came quickly. Human remains have been discovered beneath the floor of the residence. An investigation is underway. The town erupted. Some refused to believe it. Others claimed they always suspected. But no one could ignore the truth now. The father everyone thought had disappeared hadn't gone anywhere. He had been inside the house the whole time. At the station, Harris sat across from Jack's mother. Her hands shook as she lit one cigarette after another. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He was a violent man. He hurt us. He scared us. One night, things went too far." Her words tumbled out, broken, incomplete. A fight, a scream, silence. A body dragged across the floor. Boards nailed down in the dark. Jack had seen it. No one had listened. That night, Harris drove home exhausted. He thought of Jack, sitting small and quiet in the courtroom, telling the truth in the only way he could. The boy hadn't screamed. He hadn't cried. He had simply spoken, and in that calm voice, he had handed over the key to a buried crime. Harris realized something then. Sometimes the most powerful witnesses are the smallest ones. And sometimes justice only comes when someone is finally willing to dig. News of the discovery spread faster than fire. The next morning, every paper carried the headline. Local stations replayed the same shaky footage of officers carrying a body bag from the small house on Willow Street. Reporters crowded the courthouse, asking one question over and over: how did a 6-year-old boy know what no one else did? For the community, the shock was almost too much to process. Neighbors who had waved at the father, who had borrowed tools from him, now spoke in whispers. They remembered the shouting, the arguments, the sounds that slipped through thin walls at night. Suddenly, the pieces formed a darker picture. But for Jack, there was no shock. No disbelief. He had known all along. During interviews, child psychologists sat with him, speaking softly. They asked how he had known. Jack stared at the table, swinging his small legs back and forth. "I saw," he finally whispered. "I saw Mommy put Daddy under the floor." The room went still. The tape recorder clicked softly, marking the moment forever. Jack's words carried no drama, no performance. Just truth, spoken in the way only a child could deliver it, plain, unshaken, heavy. The trial that followed was messy, painful, and filled with arguments. Prosecutors painted a picture of violence and fear inside that home. Defense attorneys argued self-defense, desperation, survival. But no matter how the lawyers twisted the story, one fact remained: the boy had told the world where his father was when no one else dared. Detective Harris testified about the moment he ordered the floorboards ripped up. He spoke about the smell, the silence, the shape in the dirt. "If it weren't for Jack," Harris said, voice steady, "we might never have known." In the end, the mother's fate rested in the jury's hands. Some saw her as a victim who had broken under years of abuse. Others saw her as a killer who had hidden a crime. But the truth of what happened that night was something only two people truly knew: one buried under the floor, and one small boy who had watched from the shadows. Years later, the case still haunted the town. The house was sold, then abandoned. People crossed the street rather than walk past it. Children whispered stories about the floor house, daring each other to peek through its broken windows. And Jack? He was taken in by relatives. He grew up quiet, reserved, never comfortable in crowds. But those who knew him said he carried a strange kind of strength. He was the boy who had spoken when no one believed him. The boy who had pulled a secret into the light. The boy whose words had forced adults to face a truth they wanted to bury. Detective Harris, long retired, would sometimes tell new officers about the case. He always began the same way: "Don't ever ignore a child's words. Even when they sound impossible. Especially when they sound impossible." Because Harris had learned something that day. Evil doesn't always hide in dark alleys or abandoned warehouses. Sometimes it hides right under our feet, waiting for someone small and brave enough to point to the floor and say, "Look there." Jack never wanted to be known as the boy who solved the crime. He just wanted someone to believe him. And in the end, his soft voice was stronger than all the silence that had covered that house for so long. The truth, once buried, was open at last.